Katie, Brett, and thanks for being here. Great to have you all with us. Maybe we'll just go around the room to start with. You just tell me your name and what your kind of role within Amazon is, and a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Katie. I'm currently working as head of Amazon. I've worked in the Amazon industry now for about 7 years, predominantly on the vendor side, and now moving slightly more into seller. And yeah, it's an experience.
Nice, I'm sure we'll definitely get into that. Brett, how about yourself?
Brett, I'm MD of Henks Filtration, Respiratory. Worked with Amazon now for probably about 10 years, both as a vendor and seller.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And
I'm Ant. I'm the Senior E-Commerce Manager at Lansano. My Amazon journey probably started about 13 years ago. I have done seller, I've done vendor, all on the brand side. So, it's been, as Katie said, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, I feel like vendors changed quite a lot in the last kind of 10, 15 years. I feel like there was a time where, and I mean this as delicately as it can be, I feel like it was a privilege in some ways to be a vendor. And then I feel like seller really caught up and sometimes pulled ahead with some features. And then there've been some big moves about the transition from Bezos to Jassy. And there's just been a lot going on in the space. Perhaps just to zoom out a little bit, Katie, can you explain the difference between vendor and seller? I know all of us will be familiar with it, but roughly what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so vendor is where Amazon directly purchase your items and then resell to the customer, whereas seller is where you are directly selling to the consumer. So you're responsible for the stock, the customer service, the delivery in some cases. Sometimes you're not, just to be very curveball with Amazon, depending on your seller model. Vendor's very much seen as a scale and growth channel for a lot of businesses, whereas seller is seen as maybe more protecting of your brand, having the ownership of the, say, pricing, listings themselves. So different models, different experiences, but all fall under that lovely Amazon umbrella.
Yeah, and the vendor platform typically, and it still is really an invite-only platform, whereas sellers kind of you can list and you can get going straight away, which is brilliant.
I just wanted to add on to what you said. I think, vendor and seller have two very different uses. A vendor, you can pretty much put all your products if you wanted to, but also a lot of lower priced items, because there is a threshold where at a certain price point you cannot be profitable on seller depending on the price point of your product. Mm-hmm. Usually it will be £10 or under, depending on your margins and the size of your product. That will probably be the line of where you can and can't. It depends on the product or where you can put it on the channel, but £10 seems to be your sort of your cut-off point.
The kind of the floor.
Yeah.
But of course you do have products which are valued for more than £10.
Of course, yeah. I mean, like I say, you can put them both on vendor, but generally you would find on seller it'll be £10 and above.
Mm-hmm. I mean, usually when we talk to vendors, they're the type of businesses that are used to having those wholesale relationships with other trade partners, whether it's like in the UK, it could be like Tesco, or further afield, it could be with like Walmart, Target, all those kind of players. Do you find that working with Amazon is like one of those other big key accounts that you might work with, or do you feel it's quite different in terms of those relationships? Anyone want to take that?
I'll take that. I think it is different, and it's different by region. So the US, for example, is a lot more complex, especially when you're a vendor in the US or a vendor type account, because in the US they have MAP pricing, which is published prices every week. And if you've not got control of your prices, it can cause friction with everybody else, like your Targets, your Home Depots in our case, Lowe's, people like that. So it can be quite complex. It's a lot different in Europe, where them kind of, let's say that kind of information is not readily available, and we don't have any kind of restrictions on our pricing. Here we're quite flexible in the way we do it. It's a lot easier. So I'd say by region it is different. Absolutely.
And I know that the distribution question and pricing across your whole different suppliers that people you're selling into is quite sensitive sometimes. Some people really like it if you are on Amazon, some people really don't. There's the question about smaller independents. There's the question about pricing and promotions? If you want to run a deal on one platform and so on. Have you run into stuff like that?
And I think again, it's they all don't mind you being on them, but again, it's about being competitive, being treated fairly. I think that's the key thing from my experience.
Yeah, and to know that you've looked at the multi-channel side of things quite a lot in terms of distribution.
Yeah, I think, one of the hardest things, especially when you become an omni-channel business, is being able to control your distribution and where your products are being sold, and especially at what price. When you're doing it from yourself and you have those relationships, it's a little bit easier. But the moment you start bringing in things like wholesalers, especially in-country wholesalers, that's when you start to lose a little bit more control. And that's when it can inevitably bite you back on Amazon, because then they start to price match people outside of where you would normally have the control about where you're selling your product yourself.
Absolutely. And then in terms of the relationship side with Amazon, like talking to them, resolving issues and so on, if you typically working with a large wholesale partner, you might have a buyer that you meet with, you have a relationship, they might meet you at trade shows, you might go to their premises. It's kind of a silly question. Do you have that with Amazon? Or did you ever have that with Amazon? And do you have it today?
I currently have it with the AVS. I am a firm believer with your AVS that's only as successful as your relationship with them. If you've got a good AVS and you can have those conversations and have that relationship with them, you tend to get a lot more from it. Equally, I've had a bad relationship with an AVS before, where it's been here's a spreadsheet, fill it in, send it back, and you're just not getting as much from that. Unfortunately, Amazon has very good AVS and very poor AVS sometimes, in my opinion. And it is unfortunately a bit of luck of the draw with that.
When people talk about it, they often talk about turnover, or maybe you have a good relationship with someone for 12, 18 months, and then maybe there's an internal promotion or something else changes. Have you been on the other end of that on the brand side?
From I've been on both sides, especially from not having an AVS to having an AVS. When you don't have an AVS app, vendors can seem quite simple because there's no one talking to you. You're just cracking on and getting on. As long as you're fulfilling the POs and you're hitting all the metrics they give you, it's all fine. But then there's all the behind the scene metrics which suddenly come to light when they have a problem with you, and then then they almost make it's your problem for not knowing. So, as Katie said, I think even when you get AVS, it doesn't answer all your problems. It's how you use AVS to your own advantage. I think at the end of the day, if you really want security, you're going to have to look at more of a hybrid model and have that both seller and vendor, which you can do in Europe. You can't do that in the US. It's a lot harder to do it because once your brand gets to a certain value, they can cut you off. Where in the EU they can't. They're not allowed to do that. So you can use that to your advantage, and then you can start to leverage each platform against each other, and then it actually gives you a bit of you can hedge your bets a little bit with a vendor then as well.
And when you're doing that hybrid approach, would you choose, if you've got a new product launch or a new bundle or something, do you just kind of say, well, we'll put this one on seller or put this one on vendor? Or do you ever put it on both? Or because I know people listening to this, some of them might be purely vendors, or they might be vendor thinking about having a seller central or something like that as well. Are there restrictions on that? Would you have any guidance on that in terms of do's and don'ts?
I think there's a lot. It comes down to what you want from the product itself as well. Ultimately, you can list it on both. A lot of the time, we do list them on both. Do we necessarily sell them on both? No, because you can actually use raising a case in seller to fix something on vendor, even though you're not selling it on seller. But because the listing is there, seller will help you. So you can actually gain advantages from both sides. At the end of the day, it's all down to the profitability of the product. The same product can have different profitability at the same retail price on either vendor or seller, just depending on the invoice price you've negotiated with vendor or the size of the product and what you can do on FBA rates on seller. So
if you're launching a new product, would you today just say, we'll just add it into our vendor stream, or would you add it into a seller stream? Or is it kind of like you're saying, looking at the profitability ahead of time to say, here's what we think we could make on that particular line?
For us, again, it's down to control. We, depending on the product itself and how we'd want to manage it within the market, if that will dictate if it's going to be a seller or a vendor product. A lot of the time, especially higher price items, I will probably lean more towards seller. and then the lower, more consumable items that you could more everyday use kind of item. I might end up pushing that through vendor, but that's just the brand that we work on. It doesn't mean that will work for someone else. You have to spend time. You have to do the back on work in their own business first. I really understand the advantages of each product and each platform before you can really start to make those decisions.
Brett, maybe I'll just come to you a little bit talking about things like export and shipping internationally, distribution internationally, compliance, all that kind of stuff. How have you found that process of both selling into, let's say, Europe or looking at expanding in the US, kind of logistical challenges or legal challenges you might have come up against? Tell me a bit about that journey.
We don't really come up against logistical challenges as such. Obviously, depending on which method you choose to take, you've got to have the product in country, and you can usually agree with Amazon up front what kind of volumes they'd hold and what volumes you need to hold. That bit's not usually, I don't think, that difficult. Compliance is difficult. Coming back to what we spoke about before about relationships, I do find Amazon quite virtual. So when you do have kind of, let's say, conflicting views on what's required and what's not required, that can be quite difficult to work out. And in our case, our stuff is protecting people, so the levels of compliance are high, and therefore, we can have scenarios that take a long time in terms of figuring out what is actually right and what is actually not right.
And do you need specific, I don't know, data certificates and
you need
medical regulatory
compliance? Compliance certificates. But again, it's about for example, a respiratory mask. You've got different types. You've got medical. You've got particulates that need a certain standard. It's about trying to educate the person on the other end where your product fits, so that they can understand what the requirement is. They may just come and say, "This is the requirement, NIOSH X," and it might not be correct, and resolving that issue is quite complex. In terms of logistics, like I say, it's fine. Things like VAT and stuff like that can be confusing as well. In Europe, a nightmare. In fact, yeah.
Katie, did you come across export stuff a lot? I know that you've had experience shipping both from the UK and from Europe to within Europe, and then even out into the Middle East and a whole range of different territories. How's that process been?
Complex, especially when you're working with different internal business entities as well. That's another layer, because Amazon obviously look at you as a business and they go, well, here's your warehouse, here's where we want it to go. We have different warehouses in different locations linked to different companies, internal companies that are part of the master company, but various reasons we have to do that transfer of product and ownership, and trying to get Amazon to understand that sometimes they actually just can't get something from Liverpool to the far side of Poland in 3 days. We can't do that. And then on top of that, the import into the Middle East, that's obviously with recent times has become incredibly difficult. Having your third-party logistics within that, and then customs clearance, and when you're first looking at a new territory, for example, you're not going to go out and set up a full legal entity in that business to test a market for maybe a £500 order. It's not going to be profitable to the business. So then you have to look at who can you partner with there, who understands Amazon logistics, understands the carrier issues, understands actually you have to hit this deadline on shipment, and you have to have this compliance document, and you have to have this import information, because otherwise Amazon will just go, no, thank you. And you need that knowledge of Amazon almost on top of a logistics and operations knowledge. So it can feel a little bit specialist at times on top of already a specialist knowledge on top.
Yeah, because in one sense, you're kind of approaching it as, here's the product, here's what the market opportunity is, here's where we think we could make some money, we could launch product A and it's going to make such and such money. And then when it comes down to actually delivering the product and getting it there on time and making it profitable, and now it's been returned to us and management's not going to be happy with that. And like you say, at the end of the day, maybe it's the first few orders are only £500, £1,000 or something to go to one of the let's say, one of the emerging markets in Europe or Middle East, you kind of start to think, well, maybe this is more effort than it's worth, or, you know, something like that. But then you kind of also see other people that are then going, oh, wow, it's amazing. We've started selling into Amazon Sweden or into, I don't know, Turkey or to the Middle East or to Brazil or, you know, one of these other newer places. And you just kind of think, well, could we do that? And local operations and so on.
I think vendors easier to expand, especially in Europe. You know, you can have a business relationship in Germany, and before you know it, your products are popping up in France and Italy and Spain and Sweden and Netherlands, you know, because it just naturally will spread because of the freedom of movement of goods. So, you know, that's a great advantage for vendors, especially within the mainland Europe, where seller is a little bit harder because you actually have to have those registrations in place, especially if you're going to start looking and you're going to be holding stock in those areas. Then it's, you know, then you've got pan-EU programs and things like that you have to worry about, and all the VAT taxations and things that come into it as well. So, you know, that's also something to sort of keep in mind when you're thinking about expanding, especially if you're going from the UK into Europe.
Do you ever get into like challenges where, because I've spoken to some people before where they say, well, we're licensed, for example, to sell in France, but we're not licensed to sell it in Germany, or vice versa. But as soon as you start selling to vendor France, you didn't sell it to vendor Germany, but, you know, lo and behold, it's turned up in Germany or on the Spanish or Italian marketplace and so on. Have you hit that kind of thing before, or is your products not?
I mean,
down like that?
We don't necessarily have a license as such, but obviously, you know, when you're dealing with medical products, sometimes they can be restricted within countries, and then you have to inform Amazon that the product can only be sold in Germany because X, Y, and Z, and you provide them with the paperwork. That sometimes works, but that doesn't guarantee it will stop. No.
Did you get any of that kind of cross-country stuff?
No, not really. No, we don't really have a problem with that. So in our industry, you know, in Europe, it would be one body, same in the US. So we're okay on that front.
That's good.
Yeah.
If you could go back to your younger self when they were just starting out, Amazon, and just, you're both laughing already. What would you say to yourself? Would you just say, don't bother with it at all?
Yeah, it's a different career entirely.
Save yourself the headache and the
Buy
heart
the
pressure.
shares, don't work on it.
Yeah.
Buy the shares.
What would you say, or maybe let's just frame it other way around. To a new starter, someone else who's just getting into the Amazon world, particularly on the vendor side, what would you say? Do this and maybe don't do that.
Amazon is worth doing because the volumes are high and the uptake is quick. So for any new business who can sell products on Amazon, they should definitely be doing that. I think what people from the outside don't see is that although Amazon is super easy on the consumer end, it's actually quite complex on the back end. And as we've discussed here, it's not the same as dealing with a distributor where if something goes wrong or something requires some kind of interjection or some kind of support, people pick up the phone, you talk it through and it works. The stock comes back, stock has to go back. There's a lot of complexities and I wouldn't say hidden costs, but costs around doing business with Amazon. But it's definitely worth doing. You just have to make sure that you understand it and get to know it as quick as you can, would be my opinion.
That's good advice.
Yeah, I think for me it would be the entire business has to have an understanding on some level. They don't need to fully grasp it, but it needs to almost be a company-wide acknowledgement of what selling on Amazon can impact. So if you've got 200 resellers, you kind of have to go into that knowing you may be on a race to the bottom, and that may have a bigger commercial impact for the business. Or it could be that actually you're the only seller of your brand on Amazon, but you have other customers, so say big retailers, and you don't want to upset that business, so you have to price Amazon accordingly. It has to be a holistic business approach to Amazon, because if you look at it in isolation, you're going to upset somewhere else in the business at some point inevitably.
There'll be too much internal.
Yeah. Too much internal.
I agree.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly
Fully-
that.
fully
You took it out of my mouth, literally.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I can really add to that would be is before you venture into that Amazon world, you need to narrow down and control your distribution network of all your other places, because that'll give you the biggest headache if once you start selling on Amazon, is all the stuff that's coming outside of Amazon, and I'm talking about within the market, not necessarily within the business. Once, if you can control that, then you're really halfway to succeeding, because your biggest challenge in the market itself is always someone trying to undercut you, and then Amazon just following you down and then driving the price down itself. If you can control that price level across the market, you're golden.
Yeah, and like you say, if you've also got the internal conversations to actually get different stakeholders on board with what's our plan, how is this going to impact our small independent retailers or our major accounts, and just like keeping that conversation open. Yeah. A lot of the time, the conversations we get involved in are sales is doing like, oh, fantastic, we've made this deal. And then logistics goes, oh, that's going to be a nightmare to execute or something. And then someone who's selling to a different partner says, well, I need the stock because I've already reserved my 100 units to go to customer A. And they say, oh, no, we're going to borrow it to go to customer B. And then you end up fighting over this, the same thing. It's like...
Yeah, and that point is that's again about the holistic approach. The thing is, once you get on that train, you can't get off. So you've got to also commit to it. So if you're saying that we want to be on there and they're demanding the stock, they have to have it. Otherwise, the consequences are quite severe. So it's a holistic approach again. Yeah.
But you're the top of the pyramid. You're the MD. You're seeing all the different things. From your perspective, where do you see Amazon sitting as like part of the retail strategy, or? For you, is it like you're saying, is it a spearhead into the market and then expand, or is it like I think, is it a core pillar?
I think it's a difficult one to answer. It's essential, is my view on consumer products. If you're not on there, somebody else will be, and you are cutting off a big chunk of the market. So for me, we have to be there. I think it's challenging for different reasons, but like I say, it's got a lot of positive. Volumes are good. You get traction very quickly, whereas you take someone like a major retailer. If you have a new product that you get certified today, you would not see it live for 18 months. Wow. Someone like, a big box retailer in the US. Whereas Amazon, you could have it live in a month. So you can get traction really early. You can get start to pay back some of the investment very quickly. So there's lots of benefits. You just have to, I think the point was really good. You just have to understand what you're letting yourself in for.
You've got to get the buy-in from everybody.
Yeah.
It's having the buy-in from one or two departments is fine, but you actually need it. It's the most essential ones that really need to be on board and really understand that's what's required of them before you sort of jump into that.
All right, well, thank you. Really appreciate chatting with you guys. If I could have your Amazon vendor experience in one word, what would it be?
Interesting.
Interesting. Nice. Brett?
Complex.
Okay. And?
Challenging. Yeah. I like those three. That's pretty much sums up my life. That's just having a family. No, I'm joking. All right, brilliant. Well, thanks very much. Really appreciate your time, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.